A buried network under a Nigerian city stretches for around 16,000 kilometers, and almost nobody outside West Africa has heard of it. The Great Wall of China gets movies, tourists, and world fame. This one doesn't even have a fence to protect it from bulldozers, and the number that made it famous, that it's 4 times longer than the Great Wall, turns out to be wrong in a way. That makes the real story even stranger. By the end of this video, you'll know why an African kingdom moved more earth than almost anyone else on the planet, and why historians still argue about who actually ordered it built. The site sits in and around Benin City in southern Nigeria. Don't confuse it with the modern country called Benin further west. This Benin was the capital of a different thing entirely, the Kingdom of Benin, ruled for centuries by the Edo people before British forces invaded and burned the city in 1897. Today, most people know Benin for its bronze and brass artwork. Skilled guild workers cast plaques showing kings, warriors, and ceremonies. But under the modern roads and rooftops lies something that may be an even bigger achievement than the royal palace itself. The Edo people called it Iya. From ground level, a piece of Iya might just look like a valley, a ridge, or an overgrown ditch. It isn't natural. Workers dug straight down into the red soil, then piled that dirt into a bank right next to the trench. Do that enough times, in enough places, and you get a system. Some sections are enormous. Others are just thin lines separating one village from the next. And here's the part that surprised researchers the most. This isn't one wall around one city. It's rings inside rings, smaller loops connected to bigger ones, spreading out like a giant web across the landscape. NASA satellite photos actually show it. The old ditches show up as dark green curves cutting through modern neighborhoods because trees grow thicker in disturbed soil. When people tried to add up the total length of this network, the number sounded almost fake. Nigeria's own submission to UNESCO describes earthworks spread across roughly 6,500 square kilometers, with a combined length close to 16,000 kilometers. That's far enough to stretch from London to Tokyo, with thousands of kilometers left over. Guinness World Records lists it as the longest set of earthworks built before machines existed. The same estimate says workers may have moved around 150 million cubic meters of soil by hand with baskets and digging tools. That number is where the famous claim comes from, that Benin's walls are 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China. It's a great soundbite. It's also misleading. The 16,000 kilometer figure isn't one continuous wall around Benin City. It's a huge collection of separate, sometimes connected earthworks, built across a wide region over hundreds of years. And the Great Wall isn't one single wall either. It's a system of fortifications from different Chinese dynasties, and UNESCO now puts its full length above 20,000 kilometers. So Benin's network isn't actually 4 times longer than the wall as we now measure it. That correction is honest, and it matters. But it doesn't make Benin's achievement smaller. If anything, it makes the mystery bigger. Because this wasn't one ruler drawing a line on a map and ordering a single barrier built. This was something messier and more complicated. An entire landscape, reshaped by many hands, over a very long stretch of time. Different sections were likely built at different periods. Radiocarbon dating cited by Guinness places construction broadly between the years 700 and 1400. UNESCO separately describes early community-built enclosures starting around the 8th century with larger outer structures added later. That timeline suggests small settlements may have dug their own local boundaries first, long before the Nduo. Kingdom of Benin reached its peak. Later generations connected those boundaries, extended them, or wrapped new ones around growing political centers. One village dug a ditch, a neighboring village added its own, a rising kingdom absorbed both. Century after century, the network kept spreading. But moving that much earth wasn't easy. There were no machines, just tools, baskets, and human muscle. Every basket of dirt had to be carried by hand and packed carefully to hold its shape. Heavy tropical rain could wash out an unfinished section overnight. Left alone, plants would take over fast. Steep dirt walls could collapse if they weren't shaped just right. Whoever built this had to return again and again, season after season, just to keep it standing. No master plan has ever been found. No written records explain who was in charge of the labor. And yet, the largest sections line up almost perfectly around the political heart of the old capital. Tradition connects the biggest fortifications of Benin City to Oba Eware, one of the kingdom's most powerful 15th century rulers. Under his rule, the military expanded, royal power grew, and the capital itself was transformed. The inner rings around the city may have worked exactly like you'd expect. A deep ditch to slow attackers, a raised bank to give defenders higher ground, and gates to control exactly who could enter. The Met Museum describes these inner and outer rings as protecting the capital, while also marking its political and spiritual center. That explanation makes sense on its own. Powerful kingdoms protect their capitals. But here's the part that doesn't quite fit. If defense was the whole point, why do so many earthworks surround tiny rural settlements far outside the capital with no army anywhere near them? A lot. Of those rural lines aren't tall enough to stop a real attack. Some are shallow. Some form odd, uneven shapes instead of clean defensive rings. And unlike the Great Wall, which was built to separate a country from an outside enemy, these earthworks cut through the landscape internally, dividing communities from each other, not just from invaders. Researchers have floated a few explanations for the rural sections. Some early ditches may have simply kept elephants and other animals out of crops. Others may have marked farmland or village territory. Some likely controlled movement, forcing anyone approaching a village to pass through a single entrance, which made it easier to keep an eye on traders, travelers, and strangers. But there's probably more to it than pure practicality. A boundary rarely means just one thing. It tells people where one group's authority ends and another's begins. Guinness notes that some communities also connected these earthworks to protection from harmful spiritual forces, not just physical threats. In that reading, Aya wasn't just a wall, it was closer to a statement. Inside this line are people, our farms, our ancestors, our laws. Beyond it, someone else's world entirely. Stick with this one, because the next part is the reason nobody's fully solved this yet. The system looks both centralized and decentralized at the same time. Like two different explanations are both partly true and nobody can prove which one wins. The huge inner defenses around the capital suggest a powerful, organized state with real central planning. But the massive number of smaller, scattered rural enclosures suggests ordinary communities were building and maintaining their own sections, with no king involved at all. So who actually built this? Was it planned outward from the throne? Or did the kingdom inherit a much older patchwork of local boundaries and slowly pull them under royal control? The answer changes what the earthworks even represent. If it started with the king, this is a royal megaproject, proof that Benin's rulers could organize massive labor forces and redesign the land itself. If it started with the communities, it's something rarer, a shared tradition kept alive by ordinary people across countless generations that eventually became bigger than any single ruler ever intended. And the physical evidence seems to support a mix of both. Near the political center, the earthworks connect directly to royal gates and ceremonies. Farther out, the smaller rings just seem to follow where people were already living. UNESCO describes tightly packed community boundaries near the core, with wider, more spread out enclosures toward the edges, almost like political geography, carved straight into the ground. Inside all of that stood one of the most advanced cities early European visitors ever encountered in West Africa. Portuguese traders made contact with Benin in the Aiua late 1400s. Later European accounts describe wide streets, huge compounds, royal courtyards, and a palace covered in artwork. This wasn't an isolated settlement. Benin traded across the region and dealt directly with European powers on its own terms. At the center of it all sat the Oba, whose palace was both a royal home and the spiritual core of the kingdom. Brass casters, ivory carvers, soldiers, priests, and farmers all had a role. In a genuinely complex society, one 17th century Dutch account described the palace as a sprawling maze of courtyards with wooden pillars covered in brass plaques showing court life and major events. For a long time, historians treated advanced cities like this as surprises, as if organized states and large-scale engineering simply weren't supposed to exist in pre-colonial West Africa. And that assumption is part of why Benin's earthworks became such an overlooked mystery in the first place. They weren't actually impossible. The evidence was just ignored, misread, or destroyed. In January of 1897, tension between British officials and the Kingdom of Benin exploded into open conflict. After a British delegation entered Benin territory against warnings and was attacked, Britain sent a large military force. They reached the capital in February, occupied it, burned large sections of the city, and looted the royal palace. Thousands of brass, bronze, ivory, and wooden objects were taken. Many were later sold and scattered into museums and private collections around the world. The invasion ended Benin's independence and removed the ruling Oba from power. It also wiped out much of the physical context that could have explained exactly how the streets, shrines, gates, and earthworks all worked together as one system. The destruction wasn't instant. It happened slowly, over decades. Roads got built straight through old ditches. New neighborhoods expanded over them. Some ditches became dumping grounds. Some banks got leveled and their dirt reused for new construction. Vegetation covered what was left until it just looked like natural terrain. People could live a short walk from an ancient earthwork without ever knowing it was there. Over time, one of the largest hand-built construction systems on Earth became nearly invisible, but archaeologists kept looking. Fieldwork around Benin City in the 1960s uncovered a long history of settlement, pottery, metalworking, and large-scale construction. Later surveys tried to trace the rural earthworks, but thick vegetation and modern development made accurate measurement genuinely hard, which is part of why the famous length and volume figures should be treated as estimates, not exact numbers. Modern tools are changing that. Satellite images can pick up curved lines of vegetation over buried ditches. Old maps can be compared against current roads. In 2022, a major project began investigating sections of Benin City tied to the historic royal palace using ground-penetrating radar, test excavations, and old maps together. Diggers found layers going back centuries, evidence stretching from the first millennium all the way through Benin's most powerful era, the 1897 destruction, and later colonial building on top of it all. So here's where it lands. The Benin earthworks probably weren't one project with one clean purpose. That might be exactly why they've stayed so hard to explain. One theory says the whole system shows centralized royal power, a kingdom that could organize huge labor forces, protect its capital, and control who entered it. The monumental inner rings support that. The other theory says the wider rural network is really centuries of separate local construction, villages marking and remarking their own land as populations grew and shifted, long before any king unified them. Under that version, Benin's rulers didn't invent the system from scratch. They inherited it, strengthened the important parts, and folded it into something bigger. Both explanations might be true at once. The inner walls may have defended the capital, while everything outside marked farms, sacred ground, and community identity. And all of it may have shifted meaning over time. A ditch dug to keep elephants out could later become a village border. A local boundary could become part of a kingdom's edge. A defensive line could pick up religious meaning generations later, then get forgotten completely and treated as just an obstacle for new roads. We tend to picture ancient monuments as finished things. A pyramid gets completed, a temple gets dedicated. But Benin's earthworks may never have had a finish line. They grew as communities grew. They got repaired, changed, abandoned, and reinterpreted over and over for hundreds of years. They're less like a monument and more like a language written straight into the dirt. A way of saying this land is ours. This path is open. This ground is sacred without ever writing a single word down. So were the Benin walls really 4 times longer than the Great Wall of China? Using today's full measurements, no. But that comparison was always the least interesting part of the story. The Edo people and their neighbors built the longest known hand-dug earthwork network from the Ihi. Pre-machine era, across thousands of square kilometers without a single engine or truck. It protected a capital, organized dozens of communities, marked territory, and possibly separated the physical world from the spiritual one. And most of it is still sitting there right now, unmapped, damaged, or buried under a living city. The real mystery was never whether Benin beat China in a length contest. It's how many people, across how many generations, reshaped an entire landscape, and why the world almost forgot they did it. Was this the vision of one powerful royal line, or something built quietly from the ground up by countless separate communities? That's the question that still keeps historians arguing. If digging through buried history like this is the kind of thing that sticks with you, that's exactly what this channel does every week. We don't stop at the easy answer. There's another one of Africa's giant hidden earthworks we haven't covered yet, tied to a legend that's centuries old, and that one's coming next. So if the Benin earthworks got under your skin a little, imagine what's still buried under that one. Subscribe, because we're not done digging.